Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Like a lot of people, especially from younger generations, I'm asking myself a lot of questions about the future. How will it look like? Not only my, but our future. Because we're living in a world which is full of uncertainties. We saw in the recent years that things could go bad pretty fast. A few days ago, a war started in the Middle East. The year before, a war started in Europe. In 2021, the world was entirely shut down. And during that time, climate disasters are multiplying, and the social and economic consequences are becoming worse. Our world is full of uncertainties, and I think that's why we should prepare our future. Amongst the ways to get ready, there is one you should not avoid. It is preparing it financially. Whether it is for your retirement, for your family, or for the eventual loss of a job. I started this preparation during my master's degree and the COVID, and I decided to invest the money I had left from my student loan, and I didn't want my savings to fund companies that would be against my values. So I asked myself, what do I want to support? Kids' education, healthcare, ecological transition, human rights? What would you pick? All of those values? And once you've chosen your values, how would you orient your savings towards those values? Will your banker help you? Can he? At that time, there is one thing I knew, is that I didn't want my money to fund a climate disaster. Do you know what our savings are funding today? At that time, I didn't know. Because financial institutions, banks, asset managers, insurers are full of opacity. They don't even want us to know what our own money is funding. And our savings today are funding a climate disaster. Our money is massively invested in fossil fuels. Let me give you two numbers. The first one is 0.2% of the global assets are aligned with the Paris Agreement on climate today, which goal is to limit global warming to a maximum of 2 degrees. The second one might be even worse. If you take the super green funds, so the most sustainable ones of the most sustainable ones, half of them is still investing in fossil fuels. When I learned those numbers, it became clear to me that my money was funding a climate disaster. And that's why, with a friend, we've undertaken the creation of a new mission-driven project. But first, let me give you some environmental context. In 30 years, you won't be able to ski in the Alps. Trust me, the problem is way worse. We're talking about unlivable cities, difficult access to food, to water. We're talking about wars and biodiversity decline. This summer, only in Canada, 13 million acres of forest burned. That is the equivalent of 3 times the size of Switzerland, the entire country. The same summer, you've probably heard about it, but we also had the hottest day ever recorded on Earth. Worst, every single year, millions of people are dying because of extreme temperatures. Extreme temperatures being only one of the causes of death linked to climate change. But we can still try to slow down this disaster, and our money has a role to play, because our savings are funding the economy. In other words, we just have to fund an economy that we want. Financial institutions have well understood the place that climate change is taking in our minds. And they are making some changes. The problem is that the majority of those changes are in communication and not in action. Since the Paris Agreement on climate, European banks have funded the fossil fuels industry for an amount overpassing $1,000 billion. Several banks have been put in litigation by NGOs, and only a few players have a strong fossil fuels exit plan. European institutions are trying to accelerate the move with regulations, labels, but a vast majority of those labels are still not excluding fossil fuels, and you end up funding coal and oil with labeled funds. Thankfully, this subject is becoming mainstream. In newspapers, TV broadcasts, TED Talks, and things are evolving slowly. Labels are being reformed, and more important, a new European regulation that is going to take place next year is going to change a lot of things. CSRD. 50,000 businesses will have to report about their impact on climate change, but also how do they fight corruption, how do they support human rights, and they will have to convey data regarding the double materiality of the risks linked to climate change. In other words, how the business is impacting the planet, but also how global warming is impacting its activity. So how do we fit in all this context? The creation of our business was a mix between a roller coaster and a marathon. But we had one big advantage, starting from scratch. Our mission is to enable individuals to invest sustainably, with full transparency and without greenwashing. And we were able to write on this white paper our own impact rules and define our own strict and scientific methodology. We analyzed a bit more than 1,000 so-called sustainable funds, and we filtered them with strict criteria. Strict exclusion of harmful sectors such as fossil fuels, tobacco, weapons, adult entertainment, companies violating the Global UN Compact. Then we analyzed the carbon footprints of each underlying stocks and bonds. It enabled us to build Paris-aligned portfolios. And we didn't stop there. We also analyzed the shareholder activism of the asset managers we're working with. At the end, only 5% of the so-called sustainable funds are left. Once you've got our ID, our methodology, the job is far from being done. We needed fundings in order to scale. The story I'm about to tell you is probably the hardest experience I had in my entrepreneurial life. It happened 2 years ago when a VC, a venture capital, was supposed to invest 1 million euros in our business. He already signed a term sheet, so a written agreement, and it was 3 days before the closing of the fundraise. He called me, telling me that they were not going to make the investment, so they crashed us. It was also 3 days before Christmas, and the first day of my holiday after 18 months of non-stop work. Nice Christmas gift. We had our first 500 customers, our first 5 employees, beautiful projects, a lot of ambition, but in a few minutes, the probability of survival of the business went close to 0. We managed to obtain a bank loan and to raise from other investors that are today pretty happy because we reached 5,000 customers and 50 million euros asset under management. We're really proud of the job we've made as a team, but I still have the impression that we just did the first percentage of the job. Our mission is to decarbonize finance, enable and align it with the global warming emergency on a global scale. We won't be able to do it by ourselves. We need competitors, and we also need individuals to take action. If some of you want to act with your savings, I'm sure some of you do, the first step is probably to try to understand what your savings are funding today. For that, you can find many answers on the web, or you can ask your financial advisor if you've got one. And don't hesitate to ask him difficult questions, please. Is my money funding fossil fuels? am I aligned with the Paris Agreement? And if you don't obtain the answers you're waiting for, or if you don't get any answer at all, it might be time to go see somewhere else and fix it. Thank you.